Hello, welcome on the Innovation and Strategy blog. Today we're welcoming Bradley Miles, who's an author of Break Into VC. Hi.
Hey, Guillaume. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
Well, I'm really happy to have you. So could you perhaps introduce yourself in a few words?
Yeah, so my name's Bradley Miles, as Guillaume said. I'm an author of the book Break Into VC. I was formerly a entrepreneur in residence at Techstars, and before that, I was an investor as well. And I'm currently the co-founder and CEO of Roll.
Okay. Could you perhaps tell us about your startup?
Yeah. So it's interesting. We were just talking about this earlier, the importance of starting a category instead of sort of starting a company. And we really sought to do that at Roll. There's really been no avenue for humans to invest in other humans, really no medium or paradigm to do so. We really think this is possible and uniquely accessible via digital currency. So Roll is a digital currency startup that allows anyone to create, use, send, and invest in what we call social money, which is a fancy term for a user-generated currency or branded digital currency around an individual. So you, Guillaume, can go and Roll today and create Guillaume's. Actually, what would you name a currency?
I'd name it like that, exactly like that.
Okay.
So these are currencies that are basically units of value on my own life. Is that correct?
Yeah, so you could think about social money as somewhat in between a community and a company. This is to say, what you're actually starting is a new form of digital community whose value comes from the community itself, right? Because of how digital currency operates and the technology behind it, the community is actually independent from any platform that would use it. This is to say, if we built a community on YouTube, YouTube would eventually extract a lot of value from our community, or a lot of dollar value or revenue.
Yep.
With Guillaume's, the value of your digital community is even independent from Roll itself. We simply host the value, as a wallet provider that could be created through Guillaume's. On Roll today, there's over
Wait. Just to clarify, because so for people that are watching us, I actually got an introduction to this startup a few minutes before. But so just explain the concept of what it means of one human investing in another human.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So effectively, um, one can price the assets and network of their digital community. This is to say, you can price that one Guillaume is, let's say, worth 1 cent, and Roll creates the economic framework that allows that to be digitally scarce, like a form of social or digital gold. So Roll allows everyone to know transparently and audibly that there will only ever be 10 million Guillaume, let's say. And so if the market agrees with you that the price of one Guillaume is actually 1 cent, and with 10 million Guillaumes in the market, you've effectively created a digital community whose market value is $100,000. What's more interesting than the
And so
market, right?
can this value change in time, or is it sort of
Absolutely. Yeah.
how does it change in time?
So what's fascinating is the value long term is not necessarily decided by you. It's decided by the community you've built. And I'll give a simple analogy that could make sense at a mass scale. Um, you have people that are forming digital communities. Some are larger than countries. You may even refer to them as digital nations, let's say, and that
So
nation
what
may have
one like an example would be Facebook.
so like Taylor Swift with Swifties,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So Taylor Swift has a massive community online
Right.
that's bigger than some countries and cities. Um, it even has its own culture of fan behavior,
Hmm.
right? It has its own name with Swifties, sort of the name of the group of people that rally around her. It even has its own, language of, memes and GIFs and
Mhm.
inside jokes that only they understand. The power role is we provide these digital communities their own economics, something they've never had before. Um, and with that, we think this is likely $100 billion opportunity. And we say those numbers because if I were to tell you 10 years ago that user generated content would be $100 billion industry, it'd be laughable. YouTube was only a few years old. Twitch was just coming out, but this is the reality today. And the inevitable next step, we think, of user generated content is user generated currency, investing in the people that make the content and the platform as opposed to the platform itself. And this is something Roll will do over the course of the next few years.
Okay, that's fascinating. So maybe could you tell us, based on your analogy with the user-generated content, what the world would be looking like in 2030? Now, let me put some context into this. For example, as you know, you're an author, and the fact that you could have developed a platform of friendly bloggers is helpful if you want to promote your book, as well as being present on Twitter and Facebook and so on. And this is perhaps to the detriment of what was before called book critics, um, which are still very influential but have lost some of their clout, um, because bloggers and Twitters and people like that have taken part of the influence and are influencing readers in buying one book over another. So much like the user-generated content has changed the publishing industry and the cloud of the printing press, how would you see this new kind of currency changing? Uh, I don't know. Maybe it's what would it be changing? Talent management in big companies. Do you get my question?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Let me pose two questions at you, Guillaume. One, who do you want to publish your next book, and who's your favorite author?
Who do I want to like? Could you restate the questions?
Oh, sure. What publishing house would you want to publish your next book, as the first question? And two, who's your favorite author?
Wow. So number one, I would love to be published in a publishing house that's known for its academic rigor. I'm not looking for a publishing house based in New York. I'm not that famous yet.
Mhm.
But it would be like a university press that is well known in innovation. So it could be obviously Harvard, MIT, Stanford, or
Yeah.
houses like that. Yeah.
Mhm.
And
And name an author. Yeah.
yeah. So authors, so it's hard to just state one, but I do like Clayton Christensen because I like his writing style. It's very he writes in a very elegant way.
Yep.
I think a lot of his ideas are groundbreaking. For example, the idea of disruptive innovation, also
Yep.
the idea of jobs to be done.
Yep.
I regret the fact that sometimes it's a bit too abstract. And I also like Steve Blank because he's very creative and has a lot of imagination. And he's a very disruptor. You can feel it in his writing.
Hmm.
So those are the two ideas that come to my mind.
Yeah. Let's use Steve Blank since he
Yeah.
teaches at my alma mater, Columbia, and let's use Harvard for this example as well. So the Guillaume of 2030 that set out to publish a book may actively, because many other members of society are, issue his own social money. Guillaume will choose Roll to do this because Roll is the standard of doing this. People are now aware of Guillaume, and they're aware of the network that Guillaume's creating. He's interviewing other authors. He's talking in Paris, New York, San Francisco. And not only is he talking, he's dispersing his own currency, Guillaume's. And he's creating a market. He's creating ways for people to spend Guillaume's. We can hop on interviews with him. We can get his thoughts on our books. And people are watching this. Steve Blank's watching this, and Harvard's watching this. And so Guillaume actively does a campaign, and he says, "Hey, I want to publish my next book. I want to take a few months off whatever I'm doing. I want to rent a cabin. I want to sit there and I want to write my next book." And so people participate in this crowdfund, this campaign. Instead of giving money to Guillaume, we're not only interested in Guillaume's book, we're interested in Guillaume's life. We're interested in being a part of going on the journey of who Guillaume is going to be, and a representation or a token of that, if you will be his social money, Guillaume's. So we will actively, give money to Guillaume, invest in his network that he's creating. We'll get back Guillaume's under the understanding that we'll be involved in his future endeavors, and we could potentially experience the economic upside of those future endeavors. Steve Blank also hops in that campaign, and Steve Blank, one of your favorite authors, now holds your social money. He is now tethered to what you will do in your future, and let's say Harvard does as well. Now, if Harvard becomes a holder of Guillaume, that's not only a massive signal to the market, but they're also, very interested in the, digital community you're building as well. And you'll actively see a world like this in the next few years, right? In the next 5 to 10 years, you'll see brands and institutions, record labels, conglomerates actively participating, not in platforms, right? Not investing in Twitter, not investing in, IBM. They're actively becoming stakeholders in the digital community and networks, the social communities that are formed on top of platforms, because it makes sense and because that's where the influence is. That's where the economics of the web are heading towards, right? They're bending towards communities owning more of their own economics. You can see that narrative slowly happening over time with things like Patreon, GoFundMe, the donate button on a YouTube channel or a Facebook group. These are inevitable. We're just sort of seeing this a bit before the curve. But this is a world that we're realizing more people would like to inhabit. The tools just need to be built. So that's the purpose of Roll.
Well, congratulations. Honestly, it's fascinating.
Thanks.
If you were to give advice to entrepreneurs starting out, what would it be? I'm guessing that you would suggest that they develop a currency on your platform.
Yeah. So aside from the example we just talked about, I would say, and aside from some of the obvious stuff that I'm sure some of your other guests would say, like read this book and follow this person, and think about the startup that you'd like to do, I would say kindness is severely underrated. When I wrote Break Into VC,
Mm-hmm.
One thing I actively sought to do was build a digital community network, much like you're building now. But I did it in a very different way than other people did. One of the investors in my company is Gary Vaynerchuk. Gary's a world-renowned author and CEO of VaynerMedia, and kind of an influencer of influencers, let's say. Gary wrote a book called The Thank You Economy,
Mm-hmm.
which really informed his readers the importance of really just saying thank you, and reaching out to people for the smallest things, because no one does.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I wrote Break Into VC, I wrote a few Medium posts and tweets and all that stuff. But the very abnormal thing I did that was extraordinarily rewarding,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll tell you how in a second, was reaching out to everyone that liked a comment, did a Medium clap, retweeted, and I simply thanked them. I would find I'd follow them back on Twitter or Instagram if it was that easy. If it was someone I wanted to build a longer term relationship with, this happened on Medium, right? I couldn't access can't like chat with people on Medium. So I found out who they were. I found their email, and I just emailed them personally. I said, "Hey, thank you so much for clapping on my Medium post. It really meant a lot to me. This is who I am. This is what I'm doing." And one of those individuals was a Silicon Valley investor. I knew him as a product manager, but we came to know each other, and he became an investor in my company that led to me raising, over $1 million. So there was a chain of people that he introduced me to that also invested, and that's the power of saying thank you. And I'd say people should really understand that most folks don't do that.
Hmm.
But the path to doing that is extraordinarily beneficial. It was for me, and I think it would be for anyone else as well.
Interesting. Okay. Um, Great. So, so what are, you talked about a number of different books. You mentioned the Thank You Economy. Um, you had also talked about the Experience Economy. So if I were to ask you, if you were to name like your perhaps top three books on the subject of innovation, what would they be?
Um,
It could be
what?
top four or five. It's not, doesn't have to be just three.
Well, I would think of innovation as a bit broader, right? Because, you know, I could mention the Andy Groves, right? I could say high output management. I could mention blanking his name, the individual that wrote the KPIs book recently. He was the first investor in Google and said Kleiner Perkins for a while.
Oh, I can't remember. I don't know.
Oh yeah. So yeah, so you can mention that individual. You can mention, Ben Horowitz, Hard Thing About Hard Things. But for me, I think a huge part of innovation is communication and empathy. And there's one book called Crucial Conversations,
Mm-hmm.
um, whose sole purpose is to teach any working professional about dispute resolution and
Mm-hmm.
what to do when things get heated, and really how to compose yourself. And I think that toolkit is essential. Working at a startup and starting a startup is a very high stakes environment. It's very emotional. No one really talks about the day to day, right? The 6 a.m. to whenever you start or stop. And so understanding how to manage disputes in a professional way is something I haven't seen many entrepreneurs be able to do. But reading the book Crucial Conversations will give you the framework to do so, just like reading Andy Grove or Horowitz or Thiel will really help you think about sort of strategy and management.
Right. Although there's a specific quality on the book of Horowitz is that he talks a lot about the mental attitude that entrepreneurs would need to get to if they want to launch their business, as opposed to other books like Thiel or that talk more about product development or strategy or positioning and going from 0 to 1 and that kind of idea.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the book Crucial Conversations really stuck to you because it helped you deal with dispute resolution on a day-to-day basis, and that's a very useful skill. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think if you go down the rabbit hole of books, let's say you're on Quora, another great question and answer site to kind of find information, you'll find all of these books, but I don't think you'll find some of the hidden gems along the way. And I think Crucial Conversations is really a hidden gem of a book that really has case studies on how to handle crucial conversations like firing someone, or what to do if something horrible happens at the office, and really how to manage it, how to do things when you don't want to do them, really just how to you could think of running a startup as just steering a ship in the middle of the ocean, and sometimes you're not sure where to go. There may be an iceberg somewhere, there may be a enemy ship right next to you, but you got to keep a whole crew calm. You got to not only calm, you have to keep them inspired.
Yeah.
And I think I think that becomes an asset as you move farther in your company. And Crucial Conversations is sort of the book always stuck with me. It's a good name for a book, and it's really something I try to reread every year.
Okay, interesting. One
Oh, I
last
can name another.
question. Yeah,
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, another one just came to mind that's equally important. If
Yeah.
yeah, so actually two, but I'll talk about the second one. Cal Newport writes a lot about how to work deeply. This is largely summarized in his book Deep Rest, in his book Deep Work. Working deeply is simply working without distractions. The idea that you can't really get work done if you're also on Facebook, if you're also, maybe even listening to some, music, or, not in a quiet space. So deep rest is all about creating a framework for really doing exponential levels of work, which is important. A more important book is called Rest. And Rest, forgot the author's name, but the cover of the book is blue. And it should come up if you type in Rest. Rest is about the importance of sort of in conversation with deep work, and it's really about taking deep rest. The idea that you can't really work deeply longer than 4 hours. So actively, you should be taking breaks. And if you're really interested in like life hacking and creating extraordinary amounts of work in a given day or period, you should really understand that, every 50 minutes, you should probably take a 10 or 15-minute break. You really can't do that longer than 4 hours at a time. And if you pass those 4 hours, go ahead and take a 1 to 2 hour break, if you can, sort of mental reset. And the book talks about ways to rest deeply, whether it's going for a walk or a hike or listening to, an audiobook. And it also gives case studies of folks throughout history that have rested deeply, like Ben Franklin and many others.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing all your ideas. I'm certainly going to look up everything you're doing in terms of social money and investing in people. Do you actually invest in your own investors?
Yeah, actually I do. So a fellow I don't know if you're from Paris, but
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so a fellow Parisian, Alex Masmej, who's an entrepreneur, did something very similar to what the case study we just made on Guillaume's. So sent you the link there. So he raised $20,000 and created a market of people, a digital community that are going to follow him throughout not only his next startup, but his journey in professional career via his social money. And so Roll personally invested, was a part of that round, let's say, or raise or campaign, and I personally invested as well.
But did you invest in your own investors, like the person you're talking about, Gary, who's based in Silicon Valley, or would you consider investing in your own investors?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think Gary still has a lot to do, and he'll become even more amazing than he is now, I'm sure, in the next 5 to 10 years.
All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Guillaume.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Bye.
Bye.